David Muir of ABC News had conducted the first interview ever since Donald Trump had sworn the oath to being the president. Now, during this interview, there were a myriad of issues that were discussed, but the one in particular we're going to focus on is his claim that 3 to 5 million people had voted illegally in a general election. Um, Now, in part, there was also a few details that he also added in there that weren't actually a part of the interview, but it was I extracted from the tweet when he was speaking about that there were even some people who had registered in two states that contributed to voter fraud. But we're going to listen to this clip of the interview between David Muir and Donald Trump, and then we'll come back and break everything down.
I want to ask you about something you said this week right here at the White House. You brought in congressional leaders to the White House. You spoke at length about the presidential election with them, telling them that you lost the popular vote because of millions of illegal votes, 3 to 5 million illegal votes. That would be the biggest electoral fraud in American history. Where is the evidence of that?
So let me tell you, first of all, it was so misrepresented. That was supposed to be a confidential meeting, and you weren't supposed to go out and talk to the press as soon as you were. But the Democrats viewed it not as a confidential meeting.
But you have tweeted about the millions of illegal
Sure, you do, and I do, and I'm very
votes before.
And I mean it. But just so you know, it was supposed to be a confidential meeting. They turned it into a not a confidential. Number two, the conversation lasted for about a minute. They made it, somebody said it was like 25% of the, it wasn't, it was hardly even discussed. I said it, and I said it strongly, because what's going on with voter fraud is horrible. That's number one. Number two, I would have won the popular vote if I was campaigning for the popular vote. I would have gone to California, where I didn't go at all. I would have gone to New York, where I didn't campaign at all. I would have gone to a couple of places that I didn't go to. And I would have won that much easier than winning the Electoral College. But as you know, the Electoral College is all that matters. It doesn't make any difference. With that being said, if you look at voter registration, you look at the dead people that are registered to vote, who vote, you look at people that are registered in 2 states, you look at all of these different things that are happening with registration, you take a look at those registration, you're going to find, and we're going to do an investigation on it.
But 3 to 5 million illegal votes?
Well, we're going to find out, but it could very well be that much.
When you say, in your opinion, millions of illegal votes, that is something that is extremely fundamental to our functioning democracy, a fair and free election.
Sure.
You say you're going to launch an investigation into this.
Done.
What you have presented so far has been debunked. It's been called false.
Take a look at the Pew reports.
I called the author of the Pew report last night, and he told me that they found no evidence of voter
Then
fraud.
why did he write the report?
He said no evidence of voter
Excuse
fraud.
me. Then why did he write the report?
So
according to Pew report, then he's groveling again. You know, I always talk about the reporters that grovel when they want to write something that you want to hear, but not necessarily millions of people want to hear.
And there's a lot to take away from that, but let's first talk about the Pew study that he was referring to, that he got this information from. Now, his press secretary was constantly stating that this research paper was actually published in 2008, but it was actually 2012. And when it was published, it fell under some very heavy criticism amongst this peer review. So the author, Jesse, just like David was talking about earlier, had even stated that the report itself doesn't actually address voter fraud, which is actually quite accurate. Like, even if you were to look at the report, which I've looked at the report, like, it explicitly states that in spite of the substantial public controversy, very little reliable data exists concerning the frequency with which non-citizen immigrants participate in the United States election. This is in part because, like, this is a very, very small demographic to really extrapolate any kind of data from, to the point where, like, virtually anybody who comes out with any kind of study, it's next to impossible to really get an accurate depiction as to how the situation really is, if it even exists. So you can do that by and large with larger demographics, but when you talk about something so small like that, then we'd have to ask, like, well, where are you getting this information from exactly? Because it's, at least as far as the leading experts in this field, we don't necessarily know the answer to that question. Much of that is just really just speculation. But I do want to make a clear distinction between electoral fraud and voter fraud, because to what he's speaking to is voter fraud actually, which in part, we know what he's talking about. He's talking about, the people who's being registered in two states, and those are usually snapshots out of a very big population. Those usually happen on an individual case, but even those are very hard to really keep an idea of what's going on, because the frequency to which they happen is so rare. They're individual cases, as opposed to electoral fraud, which happens on a very broader scale. Now, those usually happen, when it comes to like assault or harassment, or like anybody who's trying to engage in actions that would place fear into people. I think I think actually when the KKK was actually talking about posting up at some voting offices, that could be looked upon as potential election manipulation, or electoral fraud. But even to go back to the people who are registered in two states, and Donald Trump was even alluding to that, that led to voter fraud. There was also news that broke yesterday night that people amongst his transitional team, or amongst his cabinet, are actually registered in two states, but yet he's going to crack down on voter fraud. Steve Bannon, who's now the one of his advisors, is registered in two states, and also his daughter Tiffany Trump is also registered in two states. But I find this very fascinating, is that he's going through all this effort to try to prove a point for something that has been dismissed and proven to be a falsehood for multiple times over and over. And you would probably notice that this is part of the rhetoric that he uses against the Democratic Party, to sort of dismiss the fact that he didn't win the popular vote versus Hillary Clinton. And if you hear in the interview, he talks about that nobody amongst his voters actually participated in voter fraud. But keep in mind, though, is that when you think about the Rust Belt states, such as like Michigan, that was Democratic leading for 2008 and 2012, when they voted for Obama, and then they flipped to Trump. So if you really think about it, he's talking about the Democratic Party, and some of the constituents are participating in voter fraud, but some of those the people who were registered as Democrats flipped and voted for him. So the idea of like 3 to 5 million people participated in voter fraud, and it only occurred in the Hillary camp, is flat out bogus. It is highly unlikely. I mean, the claim itself of 3 to 5 million people participated in voter fraud is just not plausible in itself at all. But to say that the Democrats in the Democratic Party are the only ones who participated in voter fraud, even if that previous claim were true, and they're the only ones, that would be even more hard to believe, because some of those same people who are registered Democrats voted for you. So this would actually in turn cause people to question your legitimacy as president. But he's not calling into question his legitimacy as president. He doesn't want to go that far. He just wants to paint the message that he in fact did win the popular vote, and that he was cheated out of it. But and this is his whole gimmick. This is who he is. So I think that, and this is my pure speculation, but this could actually be a lead up to his attempt to try to enact the voter ID laws. And for anybody who doesn't necessarily know, like, voter ID laws act as impediments to stricken the requirements of being able to vote, that by and large hurts minorities. And for anybody who doesn't necessarily know, like, minorities generally lean more democratic. So if you can stricken the voter ID laws to where it acts as impediments against the minorities, then you can lean the trend back into the direction of where Republicans could continue to hold the presidency for quite some time. So that's my pure speculation. But everything else, I think that it's this very bad narcissistic behavior that he has going on, and I also think it's pretty much a distraction that you really people. Why are you so much concerned about the popular vote? You already won. So if if you if by your very actions, like the Dakota Access Pipeline, if you do right by the American people, nobody's going to really care about the low turnout in your inauguration. Nobody's going to care about that. They're going to care about your actions. So it's all trivial nonsense that you're going around looking for approval of people. You should actually just go out and just do good deeds, and then that's what people are going to remember you for.